Testing 1 2. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Happy New Year. I'm so glad you decided to join me. Where is the knife that's supposed to be in the, oh, there it is. First question is RNA virus in the mutant swarm. You saw that the Pfizer group that went to Fair's Island, all triple vax, negative test, 26 out of 33 got COVID. Yeah, you know, that happened right away at the beginning of the pandemic too in Antarctica, didn't it? And then it also happened again in Antarctica, I think, very recently. So I'm not really impressed with that result. It seems to me that you ask also the question about asymptomatic spread, and for me, all of these things. Maybe I should just get on screen for this. All of these things. They revolve around the idea that can you, for example, get virus in your nose and have it stay there 3 or 4 days before you inhale it correctly so that it gets down in your lungs and then you start getting infected or something like that? I don't know why not. It's very hard for me to imagine a scenario where it isn't impossible, see? And that's all you need is impossible. Your sinuses, if you have had sinus infection before, your sinuses can store a lot of nasty for a very long time. And so the idea that people that went and got tested, before they went somewhere and then they showed up and then they got it, couldn't be somewhere in their sinus passages or somewhere in their bronchial tubes where the swab didn't get, and it started replicating from there. It's just so easy to imagine, and that then comes back to this idea of asymptomatic infection. And really, from an immunologist perspective, my read on this, having listened to a few people talk about it, is that in theory, if there is viral replication, then there should be inflammation, which then means that there should be some symptomology. Now, if that means that you only have a slight sore throat or an irritation or or something that you don't even really consider a symptom because it's just mild, much more phlegm or something. I mean, this is where I think you get into this huge gray area where the layperson assumes that the people on TV, when they say asymptomatic, mean a certain thing. And in biology, I don't think it's that cut and dried, and it's certainly not that cut and dried for these virologists that are only ever talking about something that they have indirect proof of. I mean, it's not as though a virologist can just say, okay, I'm going to purify SARS-CoV-2 and then I'm going to lay out 500 perfect copies of it in front of you under an electron microscope, and there you can see them. Yes, they can purport to show it to you under the microscope. They can purport to grow it in plaque assays and this kind of thing, but all of these things are still very proxy for the virus that's supposed to be replicating inside of you. Now, don't take this as me saying that I don't believe that there are viruses. I mean, I do believe. I use them to optogenetically manipulate the oh shoot the to manipulate the. I'm gonna have to take myself off screen because I have to stick something in my ear. To manipulate the brain of a mouse, I have yeah, got it. I have sound is low and you have your volume at your highest. That can't be. Oh yeah, you're right. It is. Here it comes. It's coming up a little bit. Oh, there it goes. Okay, that should be better. Um, I've used viruses to transfect the brains of mice with optogenetic proteins so that I can shine blue light into a mouse's brain or onto the neurons of mice, and then the neurons are controllable by light. So I am at least aware of the fact that people can make products that make a guy like me think that it works like a virus. um, No, I do think that there are viruses. I don't think that we should debate whether there are viruses. I think we should more debate about the functional processes of exosomes and what consequences they have for immunity, what consequences they have for cross immunity and attraction and pheromones and this kind of thing. Because the deal is, and you're going to see it in the talk tonight, that exosomes are now becoming an accepted consequence of cell death and an accepted consequence of viral infection. And so we are actually exhaling exosomes all the time. One of the papers that we'll look at tonight demonstrates that and actually takes a look at the overlap between the proteins that are in exosomes of healthy people, of COVID infected people, and of other infected people. And so what was a conspiracy theory and kind of an antiviral theory for a very long time is now either being started to slowly approach mainstream, or even worse, maybe like a lot of the things are being absorbed by the narrative. What was a conspiracy theory is now just going to be kind of like, yeah, well, we accept that too. And hopefully it's not that way, but anyway, I think asymptomatic is actually a possibility. And it's a possibility because, a healthy immune system is going to be able to keep the virus from having any meaningful effect on the host. But that doesn't mean that there aren't plenty of places where there's epithelial cells that can be hijacked and used for replication long before there are any serious symptomatic consequences, including inflammation, that you can sense as a whole organism. So I think we're streaming now, so cheers.
You were both in Skull and Bones, the secret society.
It's so secret we can't talk about it.
What does that mean for America? The conspiracy theorists are going to go
I'm
wild.
sure they are. I don't know. I haven't seen the web.
Number 322?
First of all, he's not the nominee. And, look, I look forward...
Are you prepared to lose?
No, I'm not going to lose.
You both were members of Skull and Bones, a secret society at Yale. What does that tell us?
Not much, because it's a secret.
Frankly, if you're not vaccinated at the moment and you're eligible and you've got no health reason for not being vaccinated, you're not just irresponsible. I mean, you're an idiot. I'm sorry. I mean, that is, truthfully, you are. I mean, because this Omicron variant is so contagious. If you're unvaccinated and you're in circulation, you're going to get it, and that's what's going to put, that is going to put a lot of strain on the health service. I mean, almost half the people in the ICU are unvaccinated, and then it's really important. We shouldn't target these people who are unvaccinated in a heavy-handed way, but we should be trying to go after them and persuade them, maybe all sorts of reasons, but honestly, it is in their own interest, never mind the public interest, for them to get vaccinated. And then finally, we've got to redouble the efforts. Vaccinated at the moment, and you're eligible, and you've got no health reason for not being vaccinated. You're not just irresponsible. I mean, you're an idiot. I'm sorry. I mean, that is, truthfully, you are.
Truthfully, you're an idiot, he says. Truthfully, you're an idiot if you're not vaccinated right now. And it's to keep the health system from overloading. You should finally pull your head out and go get vaccinated now. This coming from a guy who got several million pounds from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to promote the vaccine somewhere. I'd have to look it up. Maybe it was in Africa. And it didn't go very well. So he's still got to earn his money, so he's promoting it still, calling people idiots for not taking it. It's really shameless at this stage. And considering the fact that many people consider this dude kind of a war criminal for many of the same reasons that they consider George Bush a war criminal. I don't have any opinion on those things because I'm just a biologist. But it is quite suspicious that people that I thought were villains when I was in university are still kind of the villains now. Isn't it weird? I don't know. Still kind of weird to me.
If someone in your family isn't vaccinated, should you ask them not to show up?
Yes, I would do that. I mean, I think we're dealing with a serious enough situation right now that if there's an unvaccinated person, I would say, I'm very sorry, but not this time, maybe another time when this is all over.
When this is all over, you can come over. Been a long year, ladies and gentlemen, a long year, almost 2 years now of you and me teaching ourselves immunology to try and figure out what the heck's going on here. And I can't thank you enough for being along for the ride. I wouldn't have made it all the way without you guys. No way. In case you haven't ever read these words, the illusion of freedom will continue as long as it's profitable to continue the illusion. At the point where the illusion becomes too expensive to maintain, they will pull back the curtains. They will move the tables and chairs out of the way, and you will see the brick wall at the back of the theater. Ladies and gentlemen, look at this picture. Look at him being vaccinated in the fake White House with fake sunshine coming through with fake tropical plants, and then the obvious room full of press cameras. This is where most of America has taken place over the last 2 years, and it's not good.
For the unvaccinated, you're looking at a winter of severe illness and death. For yourselves, your families, and the hospitals you may soon overwhelm. For the unvaccinated, you're looking at a winter of severe illness and death. For yourselves, your families, and the hospitals you may soon overwhelm.
I hope in the coming year, GigaOhm will be your glasses to try and figure out what's going on, your courage to keep you holding the line, especially with your youngest children. We're all in the same boat. It doesn't matter if you gave in already. It doesn't matter if they scared you into doing it. It's okay because we're all in the same boat because we all share the same biology. We just need to learn it. You don't have to trust the science on television. You can also learn the science yourself. You can shoulder the responsibility of learning and knowing, just like every other adult can if they want to. You don't just have to buy your action figure and trust the experts. Because if you trust the experts and they make you believe absurdities, they can make you commit atrocities. These experts, these leaders, that's who I'm talking about. These leaders, these experts. Just because they're on TV doesn't mean you have to listen. If it doesn't make sense, it's probably for a reason. Stand firm, humans. Look at them drinking their beer, laughing. This is a shout out. Happy New Year, my friend. And tonight we're going to try and take another swing for the fences. This illusion requires your participation to sustain, and so it's going to require your active participation to escape. No one's going to take that ball off that girl's head. No one's going to pull that mask off of her face without taking that ball off of her head, without adjusting that rope. And if she gets stuck in that ball forever, it's going to be her fault. This is GigaOhm Biological. It's a high-resistance, low-noise information stream that wakes people up because a few people financially support the work. And I keep reading and I keep bringing you what I read, and more viewers consistently spread the word. The biology finds new folks each week, and kapow! Everything is fine and dandy. It's brought to you by a real-life biologist. You can look me up. You can, Google me and try to find out if I'm fake, and you'll only find out that actually I'm quite real. And so here we are. After the cactus, we came back to the hyper-realistic, complete with glycoproteins with sugars on them, model of the coronavirus. What a beautiful picture that is. It is December 31st, 2021. I'm so happy that you guys decided to join me. 76 of you are here. And I'm flattered because actually it's at the wrong time, and, it could have been 10 people and I'd still be happy. Because we're making a recording for the ages. We're going to put this up on the archive that's going to start working in the next couple days of the new year. And so that's very exciting. And we're going to try and hit a home run tonight. I have a website. It's called GigaOhm Biological as well. You can watch the stream there. You can actually support the brief if you would like to give any amount of money there. You can do that. You can watch the stream here for free when it's live. It won't be there available, but it'll have a link where you can go to Twitch. Twitch isn't the best. I mean, I can say that while I'm using it, right? Twitch isn't the best, but it's okay, and it actually works the best on your phone if you actually download the app. And again, I'm not getting paid by Twitch. They hate me. But I'm just telling you, if you have any problems at all following me, making clips, that kind of thing, and there is an app to make clips, by the way, which I'm going to start sharing with people so that you can take clips of these videos and put them on your own YouTube channel. You can try to edit them to make me say demonic things, whatever you want to do, because I think spreading the word is the key. I started to try and spread the word with a review that I wrote back in May, reviewed back or revised back in October. And it's still available on the website. If you download it from the first link or from the picture, that would be the one that you'll get the update on. This thing is flashing over here again, so we might have some goofy problems. So I'll have to stop the stream and restart it again or something like that. But I don't think that'll be a problem. So we're still talking about the common narrative, the biological bifurcation of America. But since it's the last day of the year, my goal was to try and use the last remaining muscles of my stomach and try to grunt out this one more time with as much of the newest, where is Rocky here? Just get it queued up. Oh yeah, that one. To get this bifurcation of America thing out there so that everybody understands it. So let's go through it really quick one more time. I know it's annoying, but I'm going to do it super fast. Pre-social media, everybody has a clipboard. Everybody's happy because the clipboard and the TV and the narrative all agree. Until now, the last, let's say 5 or 10 years, this has gone slowly downhill for my parents and yours. if your parents have adopted the iPad lifestyle, have adopted the Facebook lifestyle, then in fact they've adopted the modern media and TV thing just like the rest of them. I haven't adopted Facebook. I'm still really only watching television with PBS News because I hate it, and maybe football and stuff on Fox because that's what it's on. I don't really use television as a way of resting my brain, but the people who do, and the people who are not clever enough, careful enough, vigilant enough to use social media in a semi-safe way. By no means do I think I'm an expert at surviving the mush that the mush machine that is. I am primarily on Twitter, and I feel like the trick with Twitter is to follow very few people and stick to it. And then when you find people that say things that aren't factual, are just annoying, you just need to block those people. And you can also block ads. And in case you didn't know that, and that really triggers the algorithm as well. And so if you spend a little while every day blocking things, you'll find that Twitter is a much safer place because there's really only bots left then. And if you're reading the random bot comments, then you're already lost in Twitter anyway. But the point is this color is pink because it is stress. And so wherever you go, there's either stress or anger. It's red or blue. And so you've started out with a clipboard that already never agreed from when you were a little kid. And again, and you become stressed so much that you just accept something on television. You accept something about a Democrat, Republican, maybe even independent. It doesn't really matter. The point is that we've been kind of shattered, but shattered more or less along this red and blue divide with some angry people that were never tuned in and some pretty discombobulated people who tuned in and didn't make it. And so there's still really basically two groups. But even if there isn't two groups, the point I'm trying to make here is that the common narrative has been destroyed. If the common narrative has been destroyed and we don't know why or how it's happened, then we are in a trap that we can't understand, and then that's where we can be very easily run off a cliff like a bunch of buffaloes or lemmings off of a cliff. And so that's what I feel is happening with the shot. And the problem is it's going to be easier. It's much easier to fool these people, especially when they're so stressed. If you heard the talk by that Belgian guy who's talking about mass formation, that's basically what he's talking about. His people are so stressed and they have nowhere to focus it or nowhere to blame it on, no source of the stress. The moment that you give them a source of the stress, they will latch onto it like they're finding a floating object in the middle of the ocean. And so that's happening right now, where these people are so discombobulated up here that the first truth that they can understand, the first truth that isn't too scary, is the one that they accepted. And in this case, our common narrative, the bifurcation of America, was it natural or was it a lab leak? And that's what they used this apparatus to get us with. That's the first thing they bamboozled us with. The second thing that they bamboozled us with was a sort of, is that coming? There we go. Vaccines are safe and effective. And again, they bamboozled us with the TV narrative and the people that were stressed out and the people that couldn't really focus on the biology because they didn't have the training, because they hadn't found my YouTube channel, because they didn't find someone else's YouTube channel like Chris Martinson's. There weren't very many places to go early on to get this biology. And so when they said, just hold tight, the vaccines are coming, we've got this new technology, we can do it faster than ever, a lot of people were just like, well, holy shit, thank goodness. And so the transfection is better than infection is actually a statement that they made many times on television that your family and friends heard over and over for 2 years. We're at year 2 now. So that's quite a lot of brainwashing if you think of it as brainwashing. It's quite a lot of repeated statements that you're going to have to continually ignore with annoyance, or gradually, because you're so stressed, you gradually accept it. Transfections give you antibodies, right? That's another wonderful thing that we've all learned. Infections can give you some antibodies. Sometimes the infections can give you antibodies, but transfection gives you antibodies. That's basically how I feel. That's how I feel it's been told to me. And so here's the common narrative that I built up over the last 2 days. It took a long time, 45 minutes or whatever of talking. And then the point that I tried to make, oh no, I didn't do this right. How should I do this? I should escape here and fix it quick. Yes, here. That might work. Okay, here we go. We're going to just do it like that. Sorry about that. My bad. Current slide. Here we go. So this is the thing, and I just want to read it because everybody should be on the same page here. If you were programmed by the television, and we've been calling it for a while now among the GigaOhm community, we've been calling this skilled TV watchers. The skilled TV watchers have been told that it's a natural virus. I mean, it's a novel natural virus that most likely came from a bat via another animal. It was identified in 2020, but sure, it could have been around in 2012. Fauci even admitted it last week that maybe it came from a mine in 2012, right? Like Drastic reported it in February and March of 2020. They're absorbing every part of the narrative that they think they can in order to make it seem like we have no points on our side. But Mother Nature is a not nice person, and so leave the pandemic, to the experts. This second stage here, as a result of the first thing, it's a novel virus, so shoulder shrug, there's nothing we can do. So Mother Nature is really mean, and we're going to leave it to the experts because we don't really shoulder shrug. And then 2020 was a failure of the public health systems, a combination of messaging and social media and Trump. And it just didn't work out really well. But thank goodness transfection is a state-of-the-art new methodology for immunization. Totally safe, so much safer and so much easier, and it's so flexible. And transmission in the unvaccinated is where these new variants are going to come from. And so as long as we get everybody vaccinated as quick as possible, we'll avoid any new variants. And if you want to understand how it works, Moderna and Pfizer can provide you with antibodies, which are the foundational mechanism for immunity. And vaccinating against a respiratory virus is no big deal. I mean, we've done it with lots of other viruses before: smallpox, polio, measles, you name it. So I mean, why not with this one? Definitely with this one. And we have already tested it on millions of people. I mean, it's 2022 tomorrow. What are you worried about at this stage? If there was a problem with these shots, surely they would have stopped it. I mean, they paused Johnson & Johnson twice, man. Come on, don't be so ridiculous. I mean, surely we've given it to millions of people, so it's safe. Stop being so selfish. Hey, Happy New Year to you too there, Real Bernays. Happy New Year to everybody in the chat. So I noticed somebody yesterday when I was watching the repeat said this is like the first Twitch stream I've ever watched where they completely ignore the chat. So today I'm trying it a little bit. It's not going to go well because I'll lose my stream and consciousness, and then it'll be a terrible stream. But I'm trying to pay attention a little bit more over there. The lab leak virus was identified in 2020. I pretty much said that on my bike in February, although I was trying to temper my hint at this. Dan's blog convinced me of that in 2020, in February. And so I rode 3 bike rides in a row, pretty much all in the same week, trying to iron out the basic bibliography of coronavirus microbiology and molecular biology on my bicycle. And so that's JC on a Bike, my YouTube channel, in case you're not aware of that. Everything about it, again, it here in this case is the pandemic, is biologically incongruent. And that's more or less what we're talking about when we said, like, we don't know how it flies around. Like, do we have to clean surfaces, or can we wear paper masks, or, do masks work, or should we shut down everything, or how far apart should we stand? We were already aware of this very early on, that was all. What are these people doing? Is this some kind of joke? And then, you have like crowds of people going through airports, and then you're like, why aren't there any masks? That would matter when they're 12 people wide and 400 people deep in front of an immigration counter. Transfection is, so we noticed this, and we decided that because everything was so biologically incongruent, there must be some other reason for every major Western nation to be saying build back better and new normal and lockdowns and flatten the curve, and we have to avoid hospital overload, and it's imperative for the community, and misinformation. I mean, all of the phrases, all of the concerns, all of the various steps that led from oops, there's a virus to now have been highly coordinated around the globe in a way that doesn't really make sense if these are independent nation states. And so we see a global theater here. And the really interesting thing that I think to point out before I go too far is that if you watch PBS NewsHour, and I think we're going to have time to do that tonight, maybe after 12 or something, you're going to see tonight's PBS NewsHour from the New Year's evening was just extraordinary. And it's extraordinary from so many different perspectives. It's like a perfect sample of the insanity that we're in right now, because it's so subtle and so perfectly crafted mirror image of reality. And it's not a utopian image, it's a dystopian image. It's not a happy image, it's a image of despair and sadness and separation and strife. And so again, we see this in perfect clarity on the background that this is transfection. This is not equivalent to vaccination. Why do they keep making these statements all the time? We know it's not vaccination, and at this time, vaccination implied sterilizing immunity, that when you got the vaccination, you wouldn't have the virus anymore, and we knew that wasn't possible with the coronavirus, so we didn't understand why they were calling it a vaccination, why they were insisting that they were making vaccines for a coronavirus. And so once they started transfecting people, we were very keen on the idea that if this doesn't work, it's going to be the opposite of good. And we already understood that this antibody story that they were telling everybody, and the protection that the transfection they were purporting to give you, the protection they were purporting to give you, wasn't even really based on the cellular mechanisms that we knew were primarily responsible for immunity in a coronavirus infection. Like, anybody that had read the 4 or 5 papers of significance in Stanley Perlman's coronavirus CV would have read papers about the vital role that T-cell immunity plays in immunity and also just viral clearance in the original infection. And so it was just breathtaking how day after day, the more papers I read and then the more I listened to PBS News, I was like, wait, what's going on? I mean, I got to read some more papers because maybe I'm wrong. And I almost lost my mind. Because people at the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine that were walking around during the lockdown, because they also had labs and they also had laboratory animals and also had experiments to run, were telling me to read the New York Times and be careful, because the R naught of this virus was like around 8. Read the New York Times. Dude, you know I have a YouTube channel? Do you know I'm on my 3rd bike ride doing a bibliography about coronavirus? Pull your head out, man. Read some primary literature. Are you a faculty member of a school of medicine, or are you just some Joe on the street? And then, of course, he told other faculty that I made him nervous because I got so mad at him. He called me an idiot. I've never been called an idiot by another grown man before, not when they're not drunk. He actually reported my behavior to my boss and to the department head. That's the kind of men that I was working with. But this is academia, right? This is University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine, Department of Neurobiology, working for Mac Hooks. And the guy that told me I should read the New York Times is somebody by the name of I don't know, I shouldn't say his name, it's not very nice. But he was alarmed because I was angry, because he told me to read the New York Times. Anybody that tells me to read the New York Times better step away, because yeah. And so here's where we were. This is where we were, and the people that were driving me nuts in February, March, and April, and May, and June of 2020, believe it or not, are the same people that are driving us nuts now. And they're driving us with the same story. They're driving us nuts with the same story still. Very few of the details there have changed. And I personally find that very frustrating. And who's on that team? And who's on the team of fundamental biology? Let's see if I got this sound right. Yes, I do. When? I'm going to stop. I'm a little frustrated with Peter McCullough right now. I'm going to tell you why. Because in the last 2 days, he has associated himself with, what's that dude's name? The surgeon guy, the brain surgeon, the neurosurgeon from Trump's administration, and then also Alex Jones. Why does Peter McCullough need to go on Alex Jones? I don't really understand the maneuver there. Why does he need to be associated with that dude Ben Carson? That's exactly who it is, Ben Carson. So why does he need to do a seminar with Ben Carson? How does he win from that? Why can't he just do a seminar by himself? Peter, I love you and I respect you, but I question this behavior. I don't know why you would choose to do this. Who's doing this? And I don't know why. Anyway, Peter is still an integral part of the starting lineup of Team Fundamental Biology. Then you got Vladimir Zelenko. I mean, he goes without saying. Wolfgang Wodach, Sukrit Bhakti, who we're going to listen to later tonight again. Michael Yeadon, of course, all-star. You have Karen van den Bosch, Robert Malone, Knut Witkowski. And then now I'm going to start with Liana Wen up here, and I guess I'm going to go up there and give them that song. I don't know. These songs are funny. I did it once right, and now I got this all mixed up, so I'm just going to let them come in. I put Francis in there because I think Francis actually does belong in the starting lineup. He's one of the guys that's been on the team for a very long time, which meant Vivek Murphy actually is now a bench warmer, which I think is totally right on this case. He's much more on the same, level of playing as Peter. And so I also added Ralph Barrick. I apologize for missing him a couple days ago. And then down here on the bottom, I think we've got a nice rounded off team here. Of course, there are many more people that we could add to the team Fundamental Biology, and there are many more people we could add to team Immunomythology, but Immunomythology Worldwide is a pretty solid group of people with a pretty solid narrative, and you'll see later on. It's really impressive what they've managed to pull off over these last 2 years. But despite that, I think it's still worth my time to try and give another sort of go at giving a pitch about natural immunity that's so succinct that somebody who hasn't had a background in immunology and doesn't want to watch 9 or 10 videos but still wants to know the basics can get from it. So natural immunity to any pathogen results from an orchestrated fortification. That means a strengthening of the immune system oriented toward, so facing toward. That fortification is going to face toward in a particular direction, toward the infection and the barrier vulnerable to it. And the barrier will always be epithelial cells. That's skin cells to lay people, but the skin cells that are most important to us, that are kind of on the inside, moist part of ourselves, tend to be more specialized skin cells than the skin cells that are on the outside of your body, even though this is also an immune organ, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. Macrophages are the primary backup active cell type behind the epithelium, and macrophages are going to be cleaning up everything from bacteria to viruses to dying cells. Signals from these macrophages, natural killer cells, and neutrophils and the infected epithelial cells can combine to activate dendritic cells, which will then activate the third layer really of the immune system, the acquired immune system. So they'll migrate to the lymph nodes. They'll activate antigen-specific T helper cells, and then these T helper cells will go on to orchestrate the B and cytotoxic T cell responses at the site of infection. T helper cells will also reinvigorate these cell types when they return to the infection site. And viral cofactors like vitamin D, zinc, and selenium, and obviously there are many more, were obvious interventions that were never mentioned at any point during the pandemic. And that, for us on Team Biology, was a sign that Team Immunomythology was not playing by the rules and was actually not working in our best interest. And that has continued to compound with ever more evidence of malfeasance and neglect on their part. And so we're really talking about epithelial cells backed up by macrophages as sort of the primary layer of, and natural killer cells, T cells, neutrophils, has had primary response layer to an infection in the lungs. And so if you just stop here and you put the two ideas of immunity on the bottom, that's basically where we are, right? That's the trap that they've set. They've split us in two. It started from the lab leak, and they just layered it on over and over and over, and we got farther and farther apart. And now we're so far apart that when you look from one side to the other, it's just impossible to even imagine how those people got there. But it's just as crazy for us as it is for them. And the perspective from either side is very similar. And that's what makes it very easy to sustain.
Well, I want to get to underreported stories as well. Jan?
Oh, for me, I mean, my kids hear me rant about this every day, so I may as well tell you guys. It's the crushing impact that our COVID policies have had on young kids and children. By far, the least serious risk of serious illness. But I mean, even teenagers, a healthy teenager has a 1 in a million chance of getting and dying from COVID, which is way lower than dying in a car wreck on a road trip. But they have suffered and sacrificed the most, especially kids in underrepresented, at-risk communities. And now we have the Surgeon General saying there's a mental health crisis among our kids. The risk of suicide attempts among girls now up 51% this year. Black kids, nearly twice as likely as white kids to die by suicide. I mean, school closures, lockdowns, cancellation of sports. You couldn't even go on a playground in the DC area without cops scurrying, shooing the kids off. Tremendous negative impact on kids, and it's been an afterthought. Yeah. It's hurt their dreams, their future, learning loss, risk of abuse, their mental health, and now with our knowledge, our vaccines, if our policies don't reflect a more measured and reasonable approach for our children, they will be paying for our generation's decisions the rest of their lives.
So it's very nice to hear somebody admit something that we've been saying since they locked down the schools in March of 2020, when we said, wow, that seems kind of extreme. Why would you do that? When Knut Witkowski said it would be crazy to close the schools. And then they did it. And we said it would be damaging. We said it would be bad from an epidemiological perspective. We said it would be terrible for the kids because there would be just a lot of kids that wouldn't have the household that could handle at-home schooling, and there are kids that can't be at-home schooled, and of course kids that are all in the same room are easier to motivate and easier to keep on task and easier to keep happy with a skilled educator in the room. And holy shit, we said this 2 years ago, and now they're absorbing it into their narrative and saying like, well, wow, we've got to do something about the kids, and now that we have vaccine, we better do something about the kids. Screw you, there are kids. We told you that 2 years ago and you ignored us. You told us we were conspiracy theorists and that our kids will be fine. We've been telling you for 2 years that masks on kids and masks on adults and strangers will make everybody more stressed. That's because one of the things that keeps everybody confident that everything's going to be okay when they go to the grocery store are those silent smiles that you get in the vegetable aisle. The silent smile you get from the person you're walking the dog on your street. And none of those things are there anymore in the leftist left places like Vermont and New York City. And don't tell me that's not by design. These people aren't that stupid, are they? We said this 2 years ago, and we've been saying it consistently, just like vitamin D. In a couple weeks, they're going to say, wow, we should have given out vitamin D 2 years ago. I am extremely angry about this because my kids are young, and I've had to fight very hard to make my kids courageous enough to not wear masks in places where everybody else is wearing masks when they're with me. They can't do it when they're not with me because they're not old enough to be that courageous, and I don't expect them to be that courageous in front of adults that are doing things, and I expect them to want and feel the need to conform. But we are adults, and it's time we start acting like adults. Even if there are other adults that are dipshits, we need to be adults. In 2022, we're going to start being adults.
The purpose of it is that given the wave, the extraordinary, unprecedented wave of infections that we are experiencing now and will certainly experience more of in the next few weeks, that there is the danger that there will be so many people who are being isolated, who are asymptomatic for the full 10 days, that you could have a major negative impact on our ability to keep society running. So the decision was made, although it's not completely risk-free, of saying, let's get that cut in half so that we could have 50%, namely half of the 10 days, and 50% of that time, people can actually be out with a mask in society.
And so, with great trepidation, he has cut the quarantine time in half for people who are vaccinated so they can go back to work in hospitals where most of the transmission has occurred since we started this in Italy 2 years ago. It was all nosocomial spread. There was an article in the New York Times or the Washington Post a few days ago that said up to 40% of all cases are transfer of virus in hospitals. Healthcare workers were the first people that they vaccinated in England, and that's the first place they got a variant of concern. But of course, that temporal and geographic coincidence is just nonsense. Oh, wait, it happened in Brazil, too. Oh, wait, it happened in South Africa, too. Oh, wait, it happened... it leaves you breathless almost.
But the other important thing is that if you look at the children who are hospitalized, many of them are hospitalized with COVID as opposed to because of COVID. And what we mean by that, if a child goes in the hospital, they automatically get tested for COVID, and they get counted as a COVID hospitalized individual. when in fact they may go in for a broken leg or appendicitis or something like that. So it's overcounting the number of children who are, quote, hospitalized with COVID as opposed to because of COVID.
Sounds like bullshit to me. Sounds like the bullshit that we've been saying since the very beginning that they're doing, and everybody's just ignoring it. They've been doing this since the beginning. If you tested positive for COVID within 28 days of dying, even if you were in hospice and expected only to live 2 more weeks, you were considered a COVID death for the entire year of 2020 and much of 2021, depending on whose health department was counting. And now he's just basically admitting that they've been telling you that the hospitalizations in kids are rising. We watched the TWIV the other day where Paul Offit was saying that the rising cases in kids is impressive. Now he's got to do some damage control apparently, because it's not as impressive as they've led it to believe. And it turns out that somebody figured it out and they were about to report it, I guess. Why else would they walk it back like this and admit that they're being dipshits? Because this is being dipshits, right? These are asymptomatic kids who test positive, but they test positive in what he said to you. Wait, what did he say about testing positive again?
If you look at the predictive capability of a test to say whether or not you are infective is much, much more weighted towards the earlier first 5 days. Once you get into the latter part of that, the predictive value of that in telling you whether or not you're infective or not, there's no real data to say that. There's very little known about that.
So the kids that are testing positive in the hospital might not even be infectious. So wait, then I don't understand, Tony. What does it mean if somebody tests positive when they're 5 years old and they go into hospital for some? What the hell are you talking about? I'm not even taking these out of different weeks anymore. This guy has completely scrambled their brains and completely left us exasperated because we're listening. The words make sense, but the concepts that he's building don't add up to a sandcastle. They add up to, like, I don't know. What is it? A bouncy house? I don't know what he's doing here. What is going on? Kids go in the hospital and they can test positive for COVID, and then we say they're in there with COVID, but not because of COVID. And then in another news program, he says that, well, the test only means something if you're lucky enough to test in the 5 days that you're infectious, and otherwise it really doesn't mean anything. So since we have no other way of testing whether you're infectious, then actually we never know whether a PCR test means anything. And so
Well, I do not think that Mayor de Blasio should be canceling the New York City event because it requires proof of vaccination and it's outdoors. We should be keeping the events that are safe and also the events that.
Can you recall that in 2020, California beaches were closed? Parks were closed? Please recall that these morons closed outdoor parks and made people wear masks outside because now she's saying outdoors are safe, but it gets better.
Have fun for people too. We can't be canceling everything, especially if we're going to be living with COVID for the foreseeable future. I would say that if you choose to go, make sure that you're vaccinated and boosted.
I'm pretty sure that about 3 months ago, she said zero COVID was still an option. Now it's, we're going to be living with this. This woman is, of course, the really one of the key players of Team Immunomythology worldwide. I mean, in terms of the American squad, she is really an all-star, just a triple threat. I mean, she has the sort of multicultural You can't attack her because she's a woman and because she's brown. And of course, she's a doctor and she's also been in public health. So, we won't talk about the fact that she was in Planned Parenthood. And it's just shocking to me. It's really shocking to me how crafted this is. Listen to this statement, though, because this is mind-blowing.
Make sure that you're wearing a mask, even though it's outdoors. If there are lots of people packed around you, wearing a 3-ply surgical mask. Don't wear a cloth mask. Cloth masks are little more than facial decorations. There's no place for them in light of Omicron.
Okay, so what she said is doubly stupid. I didn't even hear it yesterday because I was so discombobulated by anger, and I have to try really hard. In my head, there's actually a whole, like, a gong going off, and there's, like, monks chanting while I watch her speak, because otherwise I would be trying to throw a bottle at the screen where she is, and there's 2 screens, actually, so I would break a lot of things if I wasn't constantly concentrating here. But what she just said was wear a 3-ply surgical mask because cloth masks are nothing more than facial decorations, especially in light of Omicron. What she seems to be implying there is that the coronavirus has gained some kind of physical attribute which makes it better at traveling in aerosol than the previous variant from a few amino acid changes. And I would like to suggest to you that is highly dubious. Furthermore, I would like to suggest to you that her statement of wear a 3-ply surgical mask is also relatively retarded, because a 3-ply surgical mask is still just 3 pieces of paper and is still not around your face in any formed manner. And so you could put 10 of those on and still the vast majority of your exhale and inhale is going to come in between and on the sides of these masks, as we've seen with these demonstration videos on TikTok with people outside in the winter cold. So this implant from China, who I think is actually anti-American, most likely, trying to undermine the very civil unity of America that should really be here by now and was here earlier in the past in America and was really extinguished in the last 10 years. This woman is at the heart of all the malevolence that's on television, and she's one of the people that scared your family and friends away from you, scared my family and friends away from me. She's one of the worst. And that statement that she just made underscores exactly how bad she is, because there is no way that the virus has changed a manner in which would allow a difference to be made between 3-ply paper masks and cloth masks, and she knows that. But it's just a theater. And so the lines are important and the delivery is important.
Right, so the first thing to note is to get your children vaccinated. We have vaccines available between the ages, above the age of 5. The FDA is currently looking at the issue of booster shots for those 12 to 15. And I know that the companies and manufacturers are working towards data for children under 5. That will not be in the month ahead, but we're working hard to get there soon.
Do you know the timeline for boosters? Because I think parents have asked, if my child who is of that age of 12 to 15 can get vaccinated, why can't they get a 3rd shot, given the heightened concern that we're seeing right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So the FDA is looking at that right now. Of course, the CDC will swiftly follow as soon as we hear from them, and I'm hoping to have that in the days to weeks ahead.
So we're talking about vaccinating 5 and under. We're talking about 5 to 12. We're talking about boosters for 12 to 15 or something like this. It's all just magic to me. It's all just poisoning to me. I saw something on the news, and since it's New Year's and we're just playing along, what do we got here? It's 10:30. I think I got time to throw this in. I don't know. We got a lot of slides to go yet, but I really want to see if I can just quickly, NPR. There was some shit on the radio this morning that I just could not believe, and I just want to see Morning Edition, I think. was. The morning brief. It was something to do with, let me just play the morning brief and see if, let me just see.
Tens of thousands of people in Colorado are sleeping in shelters after wildfires forced them out of their homes.
The governor declared a state of emergency as people fled the fires, driven by winds of up to 100 miles per hour.
I'm going to fast forward a little bit because I don't want.
Boulder County Sheriff.
It is winter.
1,000 troops along a
Possible paths forward, the official said. There did acknowledge that there are
to war.
Identified as white and not Hispanic.
Going forward. So you can expect a lot of strategy sessions.
That's not the one I wanted you to see here. I got to look. Where would it be? How would I find it? I'm only going to take one more minute on this, and if I can't figure it out, I'm going to search here. I want to do New Orleans. All things considered, most recent episode. Is that it? No, that's not it. Come on. New Orleans, COVID. It was really a COVID thing. Cruise ship, no. Oh, man, it's so annoying. I just got to find it. Okay, so anyway, I want to tell you what I found. This morning they did this story. And it was about, it's a news program. It's a story on the radio, which I really like because you're kind of visualizing everything. You're only hearing it, and you don't see these ugly faces, and you don't see these fake expressions. You just hear the voices. And what I find very shocking, I'm going to keep looking. What I find very shocking about it is that it was New Orleans and it was kids getting COVID shots. I don't know why it's not finding it. It should really be New Orleans and kids already ought to be enough. Like, what's freaking wrong with New Orleans hospital? Alarming spike. Treating with the virus. That was August. Where is this thing now? Anyway, they had a recording. They had a recording of this lady, and they said the kid was scared. And so the narrator says, but the mom and the kid turned to their faith. And then you hear the kid scream, help me, Jesus Christ. Jesus, save me. And then the mom says, Jesus is the only one who can save you now. And then they injected the kid. And maybe he said it one more time, save me, I don't want it, or something like that. And then they injected the kid. Now, what I found striking about this is that, of course, they have a sound guy on location. There were not just one or two people getting an injection. They could have done another take. They didn't need to use the sound bite, Jesus Christ, save me. And Jesus Christ can't save you now. And then, did they really need, I really want to find that for you because it's real. I recorded it on my GoPro, so I was going to make a YouTube video of it, and then I haven't gotten around to it yet. And if you're searching in the background, you could find it. It's really, it was a New Orleans NPR. It's like, what do they do in the morning? They do Morning Edition, but it wasn't on Morning Edition. So then they do like All Things Considered, maybe? Because Betty White died, Colorado fire, ski resorts, pediatrician. Friday. Listen to the full show.
Officials in Colorado.
Up things she wanted to celebrate the new store.
Talk to anybody.
And it was just like tree limbs all over the road.
Snow is coming, which would obviously help quite.
No, it wasn't that one. I don't understand. Oh man, it's so annoying. Now I'm ruining my show here. Okay, yes, Betty White did die. She died at 99 years old, like 18 days before she was going to be 100. Anyway, here we go. Sorry to distract everybody, but it is a live stream, so it's all good. But you gotta find that NPR show, because it was really an interview of kids getting vaccinated, and it was this morning on the NPR, and so it was news, national news, Colorado towns, vaccination, cruise ships, millions have died. Oh, man. Where is it? Oh, it's too bad. I should have written it down. Anyway, okay, I'm not going to go on anymore. Here we go. Get going. We don't have much time. So those people put us in this position right here. This is the narrative that we've already done. We know that this is here, so I just want to make sure that we're still here. You might want to add something here. We might actually want to add something here. We might want to add something like, because they are kind of doing it like this now, right? They're kind of saying it's like this now. Maybe I have to move this over just a little bit, and then move this over just a little bit. So it's kind of like this. Here we go. They've actually added another thing. They've added testing. So you could add this in. I think they already tried to add it in some places already, but in America, they're just bringing it in now. But this is an extra part of the thing that you can do to stop the roller coaster. And I think this is a good update to add the testing in there. So on the other side of this narrative, of course, is us and the fact that we have some equation that takes a lot of the history of coronavirus into effect. It takes a lot of the previous immunity, people dying, the treatment outcomes changing, less false positives. It takes into account the seasonality. I showed you this from yesterday. Seasonality is very obvious. It's been very obvious every year, twice a year since we've been through this now. So it's not really that great. I showed this yesterday, and somebody actually challenged me in email that there's no data to show that this is true, that there's more endemic immunity or immunity to previous coronaviruses in this group of countries than in this group or in this group of countries. And so I did a little running around in research, and I found this paper from cross-reactive antibodies to SARS-CoV-2, MERS-CoV-2, and in pre-COVID-19 blood samples from Sierra Leoneans. I think Sierra Leone is in this area, Africa. And if we look at these people, you see that they have really strong seropositivity for SARS-CoV-2, much stronger than the USA normal. SARS-CoV-1 also. And this is COVID patients in red. The MERS, they actually have very high overlap for MERS-CoV. Some seropositivity for a MERS-like coronavirus that neither COVID-19 subjects nor Americans have, which is very interesting. They have a higher seropositivity for 229E. They have a higher seropositivity for NL63, and they have a higher seropositivity for OC43, 3 of the endemic coronaviruses as well. So I think the ethical skeptic has got it pretty right here in that there was a lot of previous immunity which contributed to the different responses across the globe. And it could also be health and nutrition here as well, of course, but this paper seems to at least show that part of it is exposure to more related viruses leads to more overlapping immunity and less severe disease. And so this is in Belgium. I let you listen to this. It's now all of the people in the Belgium hospitals are vaccinated, basically.
Bij ons op dit moment zien wij toch wel een grote meerderheid zogenaamde doorbraakinfecties. Dat is anders dan een aantal weken geleden, toen wij inderdaad een meerderheid niet gevaccineerde patiënten op intensieve hadden. Op dit moment is dat niet meer zo.
And that flipped. So he said 4 weeks ago it was mostly vaccinated people. It's now flipped. It's all vaccinated now. And that's going to continue to happen all around the world as the boosters get rolled out and people have 4 shots. My sister-in-law, my wife's beloved sister, died last night, late night in her sleep. And she had literally 4 COVID shots in the last year after having ovarian and brain cancer 3 years ago, getting a very lucky with an immune therapy that almost completely cured her. And then came COVID, and came the shot, and then came the booster and the booster. The second booster was a month after the first booster, which I don't understand really at all. And this is going to happen all over the world unless we put a stop to it, and it's going to take a lot of work. It's not going to be one petition or one email or 1 week or one stream. As boring as I am, as repetitive as I am, as repetitive as this list is, that's all we've got. We need to wake people up to a common narrative that will bring us together, and we already know what that is. Unfortunately, the task for us is to show them how brittle their reflection of reality is. It's a very inaccurate reflection, but it is nonetheless a reflection of reality, given the fact that immunomythology, the team, is working so hard together to sustain that reflection of reality. And so what I hope to bring everybody together with is the idea that we all share natural immunity. This is a bibliography. I'm going to go too fast. You're going to have to download this stream and get all these links and follow along on the previous ones, to learn some of them, and then the new ones. I'll try and give you a little bit of an introduction tonight, but we'll probably have to go over it all again, because I'm going way too fast tonight in order to get done by midnight. Yeah. I'll barely make it by midnight, I guess. So epithelial cells are the primary layer. We talked about this already, right? And I want to be sure that we're here again. I told you last night, and I've told you since the very beginning, this is a great review. And there are many cells that they just have never talked about. If you see the immune system from this perspective, see the first layer, see that there's an outside and an inside, and that this boundary right here on this side of the epithelial cells is fortified by these cells, and at the very last stage of this army's response are the artillery that are laid out by the B cells. So it's not that they're not important, but they are the last response, a cleanup response, a complementary response to the response of the first and second lines of defense. A similar arrangement is found in your real epidermis, in your real skin. It's a little bit more complicated because there's more layers of epithelial cells, or you could look at it in a complementary way. The epithelial barrier that's in your lungs is a much more fragile barrier than your outer skin. And so this is designed to keep out bacteria and physical barrier. It's a physical barrier as well. This barrier here is not a barrier to intrusion. It's not supposed to keep sticks and stones out, but it's a single layer of cells. And so now you can see exactly why small viruses that make it all the way down here and infect those cells could be a problem, because there's no real barrier to penetrate. And that's why, again, you can imagine why the immune system is so exquisitely organized around the barrier of the epithelium of the lungs. It's very, very special. This is why, as Peter Hotez has explained it before, it has not been possible to vaccinate against a respiratory virus, because it is a very fragile balance that occurs here. And that balance occurs for a number of respiratory viruses. So our body has found a way to focus respiratory immunity on conserved proteins in influenza virus, in respiratory syncytial virus, in rhinoviruses, and in coronaviruses. They focus on proteins that are functionally constrained, meaning that over many millennia of evolution, the proteins have settled on a very good solution to being an enzyme, and that enzyme cannot make errors in it, otherwise that virus is pretty useless. And those are the proteins that our immunity is targeted to, and that is not, it's not the spike protein, it's not the structural proteins of any of these viruses, actually. And so understanding that what happens inside of the cell when the virus comes in is important, but the details are not so important. It's just important to understand that there are a number of defense mechanisms that need to be either dismantled or inhibited by the virus in order for the virus to do what it wants to do, which is use the machinery of the cell to copy itself. In order to accomplish this goal, the first thing it has to do is translate the ORF1A polyprotein, which is actually made of two polyproteins in this diagram, polyprotein 1A and polyprotein 1AB. Those are cut into little pieces called the non-structural proteins 1 through 16. Those are the primary targets for our T cell immunity. And that's it in a nutshell in terms of how we organize our response to these cells, because when these proteins are made, they also must be displayed on the outside of the cell on an HLA receptor, which will allow T cells to come by and check what these characters are up to. At the same time, there will be some signaling for help as a result of this viral activity, and that signal, combined with the presentation of foreign proteins on their HLA receptor, will make these epithelial cells ripe targets for CD8 positive cytotoxic T cells to deactivate them, go into apoptosis, and clean up this viral infection before it gets out of hand. In the background, though, there are other things going on. You have to keep the cell from killing itself. You have to keep it from signaling and to other cells. You have to kind of balance autophagy and also apoptosis. And you also have to make sure that it keeps folding its own proteins correctly. Otherwise, all of these things could go wrong. So there's a lot of interesting mechanisms at play when a virus infects an epithelial cell. And you don't need to know all those details, but you do need to know that it's quite complicated, and it all happens at the barrier of infection. Those are all very complicated, orchestrated cascades of molecules that all result in downstream signaling and cross cascade activation and all this other stuff. And natural infection shares those things in common, regardless of what virus has infected those epithelial cells. And those signaling pathways and those signaling cascading gradients of concentration of chemokines and cytokines to and from the infection, to and from the draining lymph nodes are vital for the organization of the immune system oriented toward the barrier of infection. And as we go forward in this talk, please keep in the back of your mind that when you get the lipid nanoparticle injected into your deltoid muscle and it goes out from the deltoid into the rest of your body, 40%, if they're lucky, stays here and the rest goes everywhere. There is no barrier to infection because you've injected that behind the barrier of any barrier of infection. There's no barrier of infection. There's no gradient of where is the infection and where isn't the infection, because it can go anywhere. And there are no cells that are going to signal with these many different signaling cascades that can be disrupted or perturbed by the presence of the virus, because these mRNAs have been pseudouridine has been inserted in all of these RNAs, such that all of this normal interaction with the cellular immune mechanisms is completely avoided. And so the immune system has very little to go on except for random tissues in your body are going to be expressing a viral protein. And that's the explanation that Sukrit Bhakti has been giving from the very beginning. And he now has data to show it. After many, many months of helping and trying to get doctors to collect the right data, he has shown it. And so what we are talking about here is a real disconnection from basic immunomythology that we need to bring everybody back to. And we have article after article after article where we're going to show that this is possible. And this is just an article that's going to show you some of those same basic things where when the SARS-CoV-2 virus infects a cell, there are certain mechanisms that are going to try and act against it to signal for help, to tell other lung epithelial cells in the immediate area that there's a virus around and you need to start fighting, start signaling, start turning off certain things and turning on other things. Those signaling mechanisms are vital for organizing, I should have done that right away, organizing the immune response oriented toward the barrier of infection. Please, I hope I'm not beating this dead horse here. This paper also has a very nice display of what we're talking about here. Here's a dendritic cell picking up pathogen-associated molecular patterns. This is, again, something we've talked about with regard to epitopes. What we're really talking about are electrostatic shapes. That's what a pathogen-associated molecular pattern is. And so the dendritic cells are exquisitely good at recognizing these and presenting them to T cells, which will then convert into the necessary acquired immune T lymphocytes that will take control and get rid of these guys once and for all. Here's a cytotoxic T cell taking out this lung epithelial cell after it was trained by the dendritic cell and the CD4 cell. So this is a pretty picture, but it's not a very well organized diagram, so that's why I don't use it. I just use it in my introduction. Again, we're looking at epithelial cells here in an elderly lung, and then we're also looking at macrophages. And the reason why we're looking at macrophages is because we've known for a very long time, although this is the best example from 2019, so it's a quite recent one, we've known for a very long time that the antibodies from SARS-like coronaviruses are sufficient to cause extended inflammation, which results from macrophage dysregulation. We're not really sure why it happens, but we can hypothesize that the antibodies, when they are allowing the uptake of viral particles by macrophages, there is some interaction with the internal machinery of the macrophage such that instead of processing them like normal antigens, they are stalled or something is inhibited by the spike protein in the macrophage such that it stays in an extended inflammatory state, and that calls in neutrophils, which are basically just fire trucks with acid. And so if you call the fire trucks with acid and they start spraying, there's not a lot, they don't have a lot of control over what happens. And so what you see here is a control lung and then low dose and high dose, where the control lung has all this space in it and then there's no space anymore because it's filling up with inflammation, it's getting thickening, and it's having a bunch of infiltration of neutrophils. And so this effect is seen in vaccinated animals upon challenge with the SARS virus, and it's also seen in animals where they take the antibodies from a vaccinated animal and place them there and then challenge them with the virus. So it's the antibodies and whatever enhancing effect they have on disease seems to have to do with the macrophages in this paper. All of these cells have a very similar thing in common, and that is that they have multiple receptors that come together, and it's the combination of activating and inhibiting receptors and who fits and who doesn't as to whether a dendritic cell turns on a particular T cell, for example. The antigen has to meet, their specificity has to meet, plus there are a couple co-receptors that have to be there, and then they get activated. Same with the T helper cell. needing to be present when the dendritic cell and the B cell and the cytotoxic T cell. There's a lot of co-interactions and co-receptors that have to come together. And what you see here are the receptors for an NK cell, a natural killer cell. We have been for a long time trying to struggle to reconcile what Geert van den Bosch has been saying about the natural killer cells and about how T cells are not that important. You may or may not be aware that I had a Zoom call with him about a month and a half ago where we got into quite a heated argument about whether T cells were important or not, and I was very moved by his conviction that I needed to understand more about natural killer cells before I argued too much with him. And I have dedicated a good month and a half, which isn't very long, to trying reading into natural killer cells. And the one thing that I did notice is that natural killer cells have a very distinct job, which is different than cytotoxic CD8 positive T cells. Cytotoxic CD8 positive T cells are actually killer cells. They go around and try to kill epithelial cells and other tissue cells which are expressing very specific epitopes which they have been trained and triggered to do. Natural killer cells tend to be cells which are standardized bouncer cells. They can go around the whole body and look for cancer, look for anybody that's doing something that they're not supposed to be doing based on a standard set of interactive receptors and co-stimulating molecules. And so if enough of these are present then you get kicked into apoptosis or the NK cell gets turned off and goes away. But these guys are even responsible, for example, they could be an HIV, they could be regulating autoimmunity, they have a role in organ transplantation and rejection, they have a role in fighting parasites, they have a role in the early control of herpes virus, they are eliminating tumors. And so the things that the CD8 positive T cells do with respect to the acquired immune system, it seems as though the NK cell does for everything. They're kind of like a James Bond almost. They have a license to kill and they can kill anybody they want to. And so are they involved any more than the macrophages? I'm not sure. I do know that they can regulate the macrophages. And by regulating the macrophages, they could be very important for the early response. They can deactivate and kill activated T cells. So they could be very responsible for dampening a immune response at an appropriate time. So NK cells are very important, but their role in direct attack and response to a respiratory coronavirus is highly unknown. And people do postulate that they can learn. People do postulate that over time that they can become more specific for certain things. So it is possible, but I think their role is primarily a permissive one. And so it could be more important to have them ready to put everything in check at the end than it is for them to be ready in the beginning. It seems to be more macrophages, but again, if I could get another talk with Geert, I think would make a lot more progress. So I would just summarize it like this, that NK cells and alveolar macrophages are the first responders. NK cells are capable of acting early, but they have a wide role here. So they could easily be the first ones that are killing epithelial cells that are making proteins that they're not supposed to. So I will not say that they're not doing that, but I don't think they are as important as T cells with regard to memory of specific viral infections. And so I'm sticking with my guns on that for now. Dysregulation of macrophages and neutrophils is likely, and that is likely from a number of, we're going to see some other papers that also connect long COVID to macrophages and neutrophils and monocytes, which are holding the spike protein longer than they should. There it is right there. Long COVID may be the poisoning and dysregulation of monocytes by macrophages ultimately caused by the toxic proteins of the spike protein. This doesn't explain some of the other chronic fatigue syndrome and that kind of thing. So, and this is just one hypothetical possibility that people have thrown out there, so I thought I'd throw that in. You've seen this many times before. Dendritic cells will migrate from the infection to go get the T cells. This is coming from a long history of research from Stanley Perlman and being ignored or trying to be erased by Dr. Francis Collins in the past few months. I'll get myself out of the way. You can see that link. We've been using the same diagram here in the background since the very beginning because it's such a succinct one. And I've been trying to emphasize that the T cell response is aimed at viral replication, whereas the immune antibody response is aimed at cleanup. So they're giving you they're giving you redundant antigenic memory to the spike. There are T cells, but they're just responding to a protein that doesn't really matter and very late in viral replication. When the T cells are activated by the dendritic cells, they clonally expand. That's really important to remember because that's where you get your memory cells from as well. And they have to clonally expand because the CD4 positive cells, some of them have to activate B cells, and some of them need to migrate back because they are the ones that permit the CD8 positive cells to cross from the blood into the tissue, and they are also needed to reactivate the macrophages and reinvigorate the neutrophils and NK cells here. And so I just point out one more time that the fragments of any translated protein are displayed for infection or for immune inspection, and that's why the T cells that are trained by these dendritic cells tend to be responding to the first proteins expressed. That's again ORF1A, and the non-structural proteins 1 through 16. And so those are the best ones to respond to for immunity. And so now let's build, really fast. We had this paper. This paper shows S, M, and N specific T cells. It also shows S, M, and N specific antibodies, but most importantly, it shows that people without symptoms that didn't go to the hospital but lived with people, that's the orange one, those people are also converting T cells as well. They're also making antibodies to S, M, and N. And we had this paper again showing N protein and ORF1A. So again, N protein and ORF1 specific T cells could abort a viral production by lysing SARS-CoV-2 infected cells before the formation of mature virins. That is the essential mechanism by which you would get asymptomatic infection. So you would have some replication, but not enough to really cause any trouble, and that's an asymptomatic infection where you would develop immunity but not have any real symptoms. This is a paper showing the epitopes that they find. None of them are spike protein epitopes. They're all ORF1A or N. There's overlap in healthy individuals. This means that you are really reactivating previous immunity to previous coronaviruses. That's why this often results in a very, very weak infection, even from the very beginning in 2020. It also points to the possibility that many of these shitty tests are actually overlapping with previous existing coronaviruses, especially at least on some of the more conserved genes. This is just another paper showing cross-reactivity to the same epitopes of those four, and we're going to keep seeing it over and over again. Boosting of cross-reactive antibodies to endemic coronaviruses, yet another one. It's a frustrating paper because, again, here they're only looking at immunity to the spike protein, and I've taught you this many times, but I'll point it out again. Every time you see that, what you know you're seeing is a group of people that's following Tony Fauci's illusion, that's this bobbleheads guy illusion, that if you have antibodies to the spike protein, that you block the spike from entering cells, and that this is the basis for the mechanism of immunity. And this is completely wrong. This is just a grant application gone wild. But you see that it's taken its toll on the entire immunology community, because you're going to see many papers tonight which focus on antibodies to the spike protein and ignore the fact that I just showed you a couple papers ago here, that this paper, as simple as 3 antibodies, right, to the spike, to the membrane, which is another structural protein on the outside of the virus, and the nucleocapsid, which is also another structural protein on the outside of the thing, there are antibodies made to all three of those proteins that are relevant. And in this paper, I'm going forward really quick again, back to where we were. In this paper, they focus very specifically on S2. It's absurd. There's M and there's N, there's E, and they all have that, but they're just ignoring it because if they focus on the spike, then they are setting you up to think that vaccination to the spike is actually a brilliant idea. It makes perfect sense. And getting antibodies to the spike is the same thing that that transfection does for you. So if you focus these papers on the spike, you're helping the sales of transfection. That's why they do it. Here's another cross analysis or comprehensive analysis of T cell immunodominance and immunoprevalence. Again, trying to compare common coronaviruses to these epitopes and whether or not they overlap S, M, N, and non-structural proteins with these cells. And what they see is exactly the same thing. Here they're taking these structural proteins and they're breaking ORF1A into 16 separate proteins. They, in this paper, try to make the same argument to sell Pfizer and Moderna products. Look, the S protein is so well represented. It's the highest bar in the whole graph. But that's because you took this bar and you divided it into 16 subparts. Now, if you look very, very carefully here, you will see that ORF1A and ORF1B are the same in every single one of these diagrams. Are they the same protein? No. But they're very, very close. They're like an American SUV. An American SUV could easily be a Kia and a Chevy Traverse and a Tahoe and a something else and a something else and a something else, but they're all SUVs. And so if you made antibodies to one, chances are the antibodies will recognize all of them because SUVs have 4 doors and that cup holder in the middle and et cetera, et cetera. And that is the trick here, is that if a natural immunity is focused on all of these things, what else would we see? In this paper, we saw something very cool. The T helper cells, that's up here, are not correlated with the B cells activating. These lines are not really, see some of them are down, some of them are up, but they do correlate with the CD8 positive cells. These are all up. And that means that the CD4 positive cells are turning on CD8 positive cells, but they're not doing anything with B cells. The B cells that are being activated are memory cells from previous viruses. Even better, what I would postulate is that natural immunity avoids activating antibodies if at all possible, because if they're not necessary, they're better to avoid. And that's why you see most often as we progress through our immunity in our lifetime, the sero response to viruses over time goes down, because that's not what you want. You don't want proteins floating around in your blood that don't do anything all the time. And that is a sign of a healthy immune response, and I think that's what we're seeing here. Again, this is just another graph from that same paper showing the total magnitude of all of these different and how well represented they are. I'm just going to go really quick in the end. It's the CD8 positive cells that are primarily clearing virally infected cells, and they're focusing on these early epitopes. And the N protein in coronavirus, because the N protein is copied so many times because the RNA is wrapped around it, so there's many of them. And when the complement system would damage a virus, then there would be many N proteins released. And so you got to have antibodies to clean those up. And again, I'm just trying to remind you one more time that these are structurally constrained proteins, and that this principle holds true for the immunity to other viruses. You just need to look for the functionally constrained proteins, and then you can make the very safe biological assumption that chances are you have made T cell immunity to those functionally constrained proteins. Ta-da. That's it. And when you understand that the body has a way of selecting those epitopes, has a way of finding them, that's not as simple as whatever they did on the whiteboard in Pfizer and Moderna back rooms, but it's very complicated based on thousands of years of evolution and selection, and we could just better trust it, you'll see why this is genius. Now, we can keep going, and we are going to keep going because this is a wonderful paper because it talks specifically about polymerase-specific cells. Polymerase is a an enzyme that is copying or cutting, in this case, copying the RNA to make copies to put it in new viruses. That enzyme has to be perfect, or all the copies that it makes will be shit, or they'll be too slow, or they won't work very well. So there's a lot of pressure on this polymerase to be good, and there's a lot of pressure on it not to change, which means the polymerase is common amongst all these, and what you see, which is really interesting, is that even in healthcare workers that are seronegative, what does seronegative mean, class? It means that they haven't developed antibodies, are still enriching their T cell complement. So again, just like the last paper, you're still seeing that people can develop immunity, expand their T cell complement, and not bother to activate their B cells. And that makes sense because B cells come after T cells. And if it's a sequence, you don't have to go all the way to the end if it's not necessary. If B cells came first, like Moderna and Pfizer and PBS News would like you to believe, then antibodies would obviously show up every single time you got sick. And so if we zoom in here, we see that they're looking again at replication and transcription complex proteins that are all coming from this non-structural protein 7, 12, and 13, but they're all coming from ORF1A, and then this was that graph blowing up again. Sorry, this is the seronegative healthcare workers pre-pandemic and then after they get exposed, looking almost like a laboratory-confirmed infection. And where is that happening again? It's the replication transcription complex that overlaps with OC43 and HKU1, and even some overlap with NL63, which is the other one that binds ACE2. Multifactorial serial profiling dissects contribution of pre-existing human coronavirus responses. Lo and behold, let's read what they find in this paper. Recording reactivity against all 4 human coronaviruses in SARS-CoV-2 uninfected and infected individuals, we observed intriguing associations. Uninfected individuals displayed higher human coronavirus reactivity compared to infected individuals, suggesting a contribution of human coronavirus immunity to early defense against SARS-CoV-2. Weird, because we said that would be the case. But our study solely measured antibody responses. You see, so there's always some problem here. Cross-reactive T cells. Well, interesting. Where do they cross-react to? All the non-structural proteins. Strange. It's not like we've never seen this before, right? It's so consistent. It's mind-blowing. And although they can't tell where these T cell spikes are coming from, spike T cell responses, look at how annoying that is. What are they looking at? T cell responses to the spike. I just showed you papers that showed you there are 16 non-structural proteins that we also make T cell immunity to, but since they're comparing vaccination and infection, it would be unfair to Pfizer and Moderna to compare across all 21 proteins when they only inoculate you against one. So let's just make a whole paper comparing T cells to the spike protein when we know from a whole library of papers that we just went through that T cells don't really focus on the spike protein. Do you see how deep the bullshit goes and how clever it is? How easy it would be to go on Twiv and say, look at this great data. I really like this great data. Great data about spike protein T cells, but we know that natural immunity doesn't even worry about spike protein T cells. It's ORF1A T cells. Like what really is happening here? So you don't have to worry about Omicron. This broad antigenic shift doesn't matter for you. Look, what's really curious here is you can almost actually see the spike protein escaping immunity. Why do you see it? Can you see it here? It's real obvious. This one's a little tricky. I don't know how to read this completely. I think this is some kind of automated electricity driving the binding of this, and so you can see the different concepts. I don't know how this is read, but it sure looks like an electrical signal, but it's binding specificity. What I'm looking at down here is the summary data. And what I see is that the alpha variant has a very high human ACE2 binding affinity. higher than Wuhan, higher than Beta, even higher than Delta. But Delta and Omicron are both lower than Alpha. And this should be very significant to you because lower would, in theory, be less fitness, less infectivity, less binding to ACE2 from all the cartoons that we've been shown on television would surely be better, right? Not if there's some advantage or other advantage that is compensating for this found in the vaccinated people. And I think that's what you're seeing here. You can, the virus can afford to lose ACE2 binding affinity in the vaccinated people because it gains other things in their system. This is exactly what Hert predicted. Incidentally, Omicron is a good ACE2 entry in mouse relative to the other ones. That's curious. But this change is really striking to me because in other papers they have argued that a decrease in target receptor affinity can be a sign of vaccine escape because then the antibodies from the vaccine are actually helping this virus even though it doesn't bind as strongly as it might have in this swarm. I'm sorry if I belabored that point, but that's actually really important. So vaccine effectiveness against SARS-CoV-2, the Danish cohort study, you probably saw this on Kevin's stream already and other streams, but basically they've measured the effectiveness of Pfizer and Moderna and they show it's negatively. You're going to get it more likely if you have the vaccine than if you didn't, and that's a pretty striking result. That's a pretty striking result. I don't know how else to describe it other than that. That's a pretty striking result. The vaccine makes you more likely to get it. And they could report this on PBS NewsHour and then everybody would understand what's happening in New York. They could report this on PBS NewsHour and everybody would understand what's going to happen in the next month and why it's them and not us. But if they reported this on PBS NewsHour, the uptake of the shot would absolutely stop, especially in children. Right? I mean, if that's the case, they have a Danish study that shows that you become more vulnerable. Why would we give this to any kids? I mean, and so now here we are, vaccinations give you the best antibodies, transfections are the new vaccine standard. That's what they're going to try and convince you of. And
I just want to say how many seroconverted were you going to get there?
Go ahead, you can add
Because
that.
there's 122 patients. 51 seroconverted. They're measuring serum IgA, which is a mucosal antibody, which is appropriate for this. It's appropriate to immunize with a live attenuated oral vaccine because this is a gut infection. It's appropriate to look for IgA because that's mucosal antibody, which is at the gut barrier to infection. So.
Now, I've played this for you twice already, and I know I'm kind of belaboring the point, but he's making the point for me that it's important to vaccinate at the barrier of infection and that the barrier of infection is actually an important distinction in terms of understanding the disease. This was for rotavirus, that's really fine, but these are academic biologists, and so I would expect that they also know well about this science paper and the papers that came after it because he is a very famous virologist, this Michael Warbley. And so what he shows is that the flu virus that you get when you're a kid, you're virtually impervious to the rest of your life, so much so that they called it hemagglutinin imprinting. It's a permanent memory. So they should already have some idea that vaccinating in young kids is not just a one shot, do it all, it makes sense to do it with everything kind of thing, because there are some very powerful learning mechanisms at play early on in life. They should know this data pretty well. They should also know this data pretty well. I mean, they're doing Journal Club on COVID every week, sometimes 4 or 5 times. They've done 800 episodes of that silly show. They ought to know that children develop robust and sustained cross-reactive spike-specific. Who gives a shit about spike-specific except for nature immunology? again, because they are trying to compare this to the vaccines, to the transfections. They have to focus on the spike. But I've already shown you at least 6 papers this hour that show you that there are many, many other targets for immunity, many, many other targets for acquired immunity. Most of those targets are functionally conserved proteins on the ORF1A polyprotein. And so if they make antibodies to the spike, it's like a last-ditch bad disease effort. It's significant, I guess, that it's there. All this does is tell you that the original memories of the endemic coronaviruses are being modulated and augmented in these children to incorporate some data from the SARS-CoV-2 virus, and that's all they need. This is the best update they could get, is a mild infection. Maybe once a year for the next 10 years would be much better than 2 shots and a booster every year for the next 2 years, 10 years. That's for absolute certain. We should not be giving flu vaccine to kids in America. They don't do it anywhere else on the planet. Wake up. And so these people ought to know that. But for them, antibodies are the best available and convenient indicator of a recent immune response. But they can no longer separate seroconversion from immunity in their head because they've been playing this game way too long, and so has everyone who's been watching television for the last 2 years, because that's all they've heard. Despite repeating over and over, we don't know what antibody titers mean. They all say it. Immunomythology worldwide still uses them as primary data, and this fact effectively has weakened their minds. They know these numbers mean nothing relative to one another nor to outcome, and yet they continue to use and discuss them as if they do. This makes them at best quite dim and at worst quite malevolent.
We partnered with a group at the New York Blood Center and the Galveston National Laboratory to take on the big scientific challenge of coronavirus vaccines. And I say a scientific challenge because one of the things that we're not hearing a lot about is the unique potential safety problem of coronavirus vaccines. This was first found in the early 1960s with the respiratory syncytial virus vaccines, and it was done here in Washington with the NIH and Children's National Medical Center, that some of those kids who got the vaccine actually did worse, and I believe there were 2 deaths in the consequence of that study. Because what happens with certain types of respiratory virus vaccines, you get immunized, and then when you get actually exposed to the virus, you get this kind of paradoxical immune enhancement phenomenon. And we don't entirely understand the basis of it, but we recognize.
We don't understand the basis of it. He says, to go on to say that this killed the respiratory syncytial vaccine. We're going to see later that Moderna is working on one of those again in cooperation with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation.
So one of the questions that I've heard from a number of people is, doing the safety trials obviously is incredibly important because you want to make sure that you're not injecting people with something that could be harmful. But once you have that, why not push harder on rolling it out more aggressively, even if you don't know exactly how effective it is? What's the public health rationale and thinking behind needing to prove that it's extremely effective before rolling out something that you know is safe?
And so again, here is a very interesting set of questions coming from Mark Zuckerberg, because if you applied that same rationale to previously approved, already widely available drugs like ivermectin and hydrochloroquine, which have a long safety record of distribution and use around the world at certain doses, you could see very easily why you know it's safe, so why not try it even if you don't know it's effective? That is exactly the rationale behind any and all off-label use of any drug by any doctor ever, which is a very encouraged practice up until last year, because doctors were considered independent thinkers, independent biologists, And if they know how a drug works and they have experience using it and they want to use it off label, it's fine. In 2020, that all changed. But yet here he is saying, when you know it's safe enough, then why don't we roll it out en masse? Because if candy bars don't work, but they don't kill anybody, then why wouldn't we give anybody a candy bar and maybe it'll help? He's thinking about them like they're an apple. Maybe an apple won't help, but maybe we could give it to everybody. How about we start with vitamin D, C, and zinc? Because maybe they won't help, but it won't hurt anyone. Maybe we could start with a multivitamin, Dr. Zuckerberg.
Okay, that's a good question. The initial safety study, Mark, is to see if I inject it in the arm, does it have some sort of idiosyncratic or bad reaction? There's another element to safety, and that is if you vaccinate someone and they make an antibody response and then they get exposed and infected, does the response that you induce actually enhance the infection and make it worse? And the only way you'll know that is if you do an extended study, not in a normal volunteer who has no risk of infection, but in people who are out there in a risk situation. This would not be the first time, if it happened, that a vaccine that looked good in initial safety actually made people worse.
This wouldn't be the first time, and it looks good in initial safety, so we gave it an EUA, and we still don't have the approved version of Cormanity out there yet. So actually, it sounds like this might be the story that he's going to tell in half a year when he resigns. Well, it looked good in safety, and because we were in a pandemic and we had to do it, we just did it. I regret to say that it didn't work. I regret to say that there was some there was some disease enhancement due to the vaccine not working, but, you know, it was a choice, kind of like the trolley problem, and we made a choice.
My question is from the team from Pfizer or from Israel for that matter. It was not unexpected that the antibody levels would wane after the vaccinations, but has anyone attempted to correlate a certain titer with protection? Because if we knew the minimum titer needed for protection, that would be a great way for us to monitor whether or not we really needed booster shots. So is that something someone on the team can speak to, please?
Anybody from Israel want to talk about the data from Sheba Medical Center?
Of course, she's going to give a very long, it's not very easy to understand explanation that they don't know, and there is no correlation between the titers and immunity. What I find very shocking is this doctor who's asking the question doesn't already know that. It's basic immunology 101. They've been talking about it on the European vaccination website from the very beginning, and the vaccination they've been talking about it since the very beginning of the pandemic. The idea that he's still asking this question in September of 2021 belies how awful our situation is. So many doctors just don't even understand anymore and have bought into this idea that we are protecting and that Fauci is keeping secret, which is that he has funded this research for more than 30 years. And he has funded it under the pretense of this one NIAID hypothesis, which is that if we can make the body make antibodies to the spike protein, the glycoprotein of, I'm sorry to break it to you, but Ebola, AIDS, respiratory syncytial virus, flu, and coronavirus, if we could just make the body make antibodies to those spiky proteins, those glycoproteins on the outside, we will have immunity. And this has never worked for any virus that he has pushed this idea on. He pushed it on AIDS for 20 years. where they tried to put pieces of the virus in other viruses. They tried to put the pieces and some adjuvant, and it never, ever worked. Even when you made antibodies to the protein that they put in you, and the immune system did what he expected it to do, the results were not what he expected to get. The viral set point in AIDS didn't change. The infectivity, it made it worse in respiratory syncytial virus. We are talking about a failed idea, which has allowed them to recycle money and grants and over and over again. All you have to do is start with this idea, and propose to try to create a model where this idea works. And in this case, they funded the idea of finding a novel human coronavirus candidate in bats that attacked or assaulted the ACE2 receptor, that bound the ACE2 receptor, because that's a lung receptor, and then they wanted to use that coronavirus, a harmless cold, to carry other immunogens into the body on its spike. That was their idea. If you made antibodies to that spike, then those antibodies would be good for that coronavirus and good for whatever you put in. That was their idea. Can we add other immunogenic sequences so that I can make an AIDS vaccine too? Incidentally, there is a group, and I shit you not, there is a group at the University of Pittsburgh right now working on a candidate measles vaccine where they put the measles proteins on the outside of an adenovirus. It's very similar to a candidate like AstraZeneca or the Johnson & Johnson, but then for measles, mumps, and rubella, and COVID-19, all in the same thing. Exactly what I'm talking about. A sort of universal vaccination. And again, these things are getting funded because they are organized around the same fundamental hypothesis, the hypothesis that Fauci is trying to protect and not reveal as the cause of the pandemic. That is the cause of the pandemic. They outsourced this stuff over to China because it would be safer to do it over there, and then it got out. That's the best example. Otherwise, they let it out. And maybe China let it out because they knew they had a lot of immunity to it and it wouldn't bother them at all, and it turns out they were right. But this diagram coming from Francis's own blog was used over and over again. It is too well designed and too beautiful not to be the foundation of their main idea. This is how they also pitched everything to do with the mRNA technology. That the mRNA technology will allow us to make your body make antibodies to any target that we put in. If we want to immunize you and make you make antibodies to raspberries, well, then we'll put raspberries in there, and that's what will happen, figuratively speaking. So that's the sales pitch at the meeting. That's the sales pitch at the grant. That's the sales pitch in the lab meeting. That's the sales pitch to the stockholders and venture capitalists for the last 20 years. And so one of the things that they could have done was insert certain toxins that they knew would be highly immunogenic. For example, a super antigenic hyperinflammation type sequence would be really great if you wanted to use the spike protein as its own adjuvant. Typically, when you vaccinate, you would put the protein of interest that you want the body to pay attention to and then some chemical irritant called an adjuvant next to it. And so one biological alternative that they've been playing with for a very long time is to put small antigenic sequences into the spike protein so that when they put the protein in you, it would have these irritating sequences in it, and you would be more apt to react and make antibodies to it. So just in case you don't know what Staphylococcus enterotoxin B is, it's like an inhaled toxin. The bacteria makes it, and And it's kind of like tetanus toxin, but it's, you know, just a protein that can really, really cause problems if you get too much of it in you. And so it's very strange that this protein sequence would also be in the spike protein. So multi-inflammatory or multi-system inflammatory symptoms seems to be gut dependent, and so spike protein breaking down the gut barrier, and maybe in kids that already have a leaky gut from bad habits and bad nutrition, I think is a much more apt explanation. There's a couple different papers that are showing zonulin dependent loss. Zonulin is a protein that gets secreted by stressed out epithelial cells. Epithelial cells again, ladies and gentlemen. And so the breaking of the seals between the epithelial cells is something that can also happen in the lungs. And so again, I hope you're starting to see these parallels here. And if you're starting to see these parallels, then you're really starting to understand how immunology works, and that gets me very excited. Here's another plasma marker. This is zonulin again, indicating in hospitalized people that apparently the gut-blood barrier is breaking down, and this is causing lots of problems and leading to advanced COVID. So anyway, I think it's important to pay attention because, again, a lot of these frontline doctors and doctors that have been laughed at for the last 2 years are people who have been saying this as well, that the gut flora are important and that your gut flora could be interacting with SARS, etc. So it's all about the spike and what they did to it, how they enriched it, and what's in it. That's the main important thing to understand. It's important to understand that the spike furin cleavage site gets cut such that it can get stabilized in the open position upon secretion. That can be a problem because that can lead to cell transmission, going directly from cell to cell without needing to have a receptor like ACE2 per se, and this seems to be happening as well. This paper shows that. This is syncytial formation. It also happens in respiratory syncytial virus, causing damage to the lungs. So they've distracted you for a very long time because this polybasic cleavage site was supposed to be the primary indicator of a laboratory leak. But of course, this is just the tip of the iceberg, and it's in fact all of these overlapping antigenic sequences that are the problem and that are the most likely indicator that this was a very elaborately designed by a watchmaker, as Luc Montagnier said way back in February. This is somebody's baby. Somebody's very proud of how beautiful this is. And the number of hemagglutinin overlaps with other, hemagglutinin. These things could, in theory, even explain why flu disappeared, although I don't think so. I think it's much more likely that we're just calling it something else, although, you don't know. Infection-enhancing antibodies have been found in people and for a long time now. Just to keep going on this, the thrombocytopenia, of course, we're very familiar with. That seems to be also something to do with activating inflammation, and this probably has to do with the CD147 receptor, which is here. And this is causing platelet to be infected, and platelets to be infected means that you can have, again, permeation of endothelial barriers, and you can also have damage to endothelium, and this can cause leaking into the blood, etc., leaking into the brain. This is pericytes, again, controlling the blood-brain barrier and showing you that if they get damaged, then you get leakage. I'm going to skip through that because I showed you that yesterday. Reactivation of herpes. This is probably to do with CD8 positive cells being damaged. Same thing in this paper that we looked at yesterday, again showing that there's a very high likelihood that because there's so many tumor suppressor proteins that are overlapping in S2 that you're going to probably make antibodies to those, which means you're going to clear them, which means tumor suppression is going to go down and cancer is going to go up. And that's what a lot of doctors are reporting. So transfections give you the best antibodies, and this is the new vaccine standard. We're going to keep going with this. This is the 6-month safety thing that everybody pointed out, including Steve Kirsch, that actually after they unblinded and they gave everybody more vaccine that wanted it, then 20 people in total died in the vaccine group and only 14 in the placebo. So a very strange result to ignore in light of the fact that FIFA people are dropping and they're all clutching their chest, in light of the fact that we've had a whistleblower blow whistle on the trials of the Pfizer vaccine, and we found out a lot from that whistleblowing. And now we're starting to think that a lot of deaths are being undercounted because the pathologists in Germany have started to do autopsies, and they find about 40% of them seem to be directly related to the vaccine and clotting and neutrophils and extended inflammation. Norway found a very similar ratio in one old folks home, and so the big question then that Steve Kirsch wants answered: if we have 14,000 deaths or more listed in VAERS and we can't figure out any of those might be from the vaccine, but they can look at smaller numbers and figure it out, then we must be doing something very incorrect. If you haven't read this paper, a real nice new one coming out in 2022 showing the potential implications of the lipid nanoparticles in the pathogenesis of myocarditis associated with the use of these vaccines. I don't think it's only the lipid nanoparticles. That's just where they take the mRNA. But nonetheless, we had a video with Kevin McKernan, a molecular biologist who told us a lot about G quadruplex forming sequences in RNA. This is a nice paper talking about those and what they can do for activating the immune system, etc. And this is just showing where they are and how they find them. And then what Kevin showed us in his paper and has talked about is that because they have made so many alterations in the RNA that they're injecting, instead of having roughly 4 quadruplex G formations that are in the vaccine spike protein RNA, because they've changed so many bases and substituted so many with pseudouridine and optimized them for maximum translation, you get like 16 to 19 in some of these, and so you're going to have vastly different reactions from the internal cell machinery that we talked about earlier in the talk. That should be up for a few more days, and then we'll put it on my website so you can continue to see that. So in light of all those things, it's really interesting to note that they have been told that intramuscular injection of these LNPs will just give a little bit of spike protein, and even by adenovirus, that'll be safe and effective. After this short exposure to the spike protein, the immune system will make neutralizing antibodies, and it will be all good. It doesn't really make sense from the perspective of understanding natural immunity as this pluripotent response to all these different proteins and instead focusing on a spike, but nonetheless, that's what they're selling us. And if there's any problem, it's because your antibody levels have gone down. You just need a booster. So you're still lucky because, again, your infection would have been much worse without being transfected, and I think that's where the lies are going to start to be exposed, because these people are going to have worse exposures than us, and some of them are going to end up in the hospital. Some of them are going to be reinfected in February with an even nastier version of the same thing, and they're going to be frustrated, and the TV's going to tell them to blame it on us, but I don't think they're going to be able to do it because they're not that dumb. They've been trying to convince you that all of our molecular biology is bent on making these vaccines for the last 20 years, but it's not. We've been working understanding the genome and understanding how it relates to protein function, but don't let them fool you into thinking that we've been really concerned about this. Also, don't let them fool you with pretty cartoons to make them think that they can put your lipid nanoparticles wherever they want to, and that's where they stay, because that's a great big lie, and we know that already. And please don't let them fast track any more vaccines for things that they can't vaccinate for. You heard him say it, and I'll say it again. We have not really vaccinated against a respiratory virus successfully, and I don't think that the transfections are going to help us accomplish that goal any quicker, even though they are rushing to do so. Please don't let them do it. Every RNA is a new drug. Every LNP is a new drug. Gee, many Christmas, let's stop.
Like many viruses, it uses a protein on its surface to attach to and enter our cells. Antibodies that fit onto this protein can block the virus from attaching. Coronavirus mRNA vaccines teach our immune system to make these antibodies.
It's that simple, right? So as long as you have enough antibodies to cover the outside of every coronavirus in your body, then the coronavirus can't do anything. And if you start to do that mental simulation in your head, you'll see how stupid that idea is.
How do mRNA vaccines do
Look
that?
at it all come out.
mRNA.
The
is a
scale's
genetic
really
material
nice on
that
this video.
instructs our cells to produce proteins. The mRNA in the vaccine is wrapped in a layer of fat particles that protect it and help it get taken up by specialized cells of the immune system called dendritic cells.
And so this is a nice alternate explanation for how it works, because there's no way in hell that you could want the lipid nanoparticle to go to the dendritic cells. That's not what you want. That's no way that's what you want. You want the dendritic cells to find it in a natural way. You don't want it to start growing inside of them, because then they will not present it to T cells, because it will just be expressed on the outside of the cell. It will never enter the antigen processing stream. So it's very disingenuous what
Once
they say
inside
here.
these cells, the mRNA does not
No
enter
way.
the cell's nucleus or interact with DNA, but remains in the cytoplasm with other mRNA molecules, waiting to create the enzymes our body needs. When ribosomes read the vaccine mRNA, pieces of the viral surface protein are made. These pieces are then displayed on the surface of the dendritic cell.
This is kind of nice because they don't look all the same, and according to Kevin, they definitely will not be all the same, because they will make lots of errors because all the pseudouridines. So this is kind of nice, but
The dendritic cell travels to a nearby lymph node, where it presents the surface proteins to other cells of the immune system.
as you know, that has to be presented on an MHC2 molecule or an HLA2 molecule, so it has to go through the procedures, the molecular cascades that will put it on there and present it. It's not just whatever's sticking out of the dendritic cell. So again, what we just talked about and what they are presenting here is wrong. It doesn't agree. There's incongruence here. So although it's a really pretty video, they are bullshitting you about the details of this immunology. And after many months of study with me, I hope you can see it.
Some of these cells, called helper T cells, train B cells how to make antibodies that will fit perfectly onto the surface protein of the virus. Other cells stimulated by the protein pieces, called cytotoxic T cells, can kill virus-infected cells. Now, when the coronavirus tries to infect us, our immune system is ready, immediately recognizing, neutralizing, and destroying it before we ever even have a chance to become sick.
So where do all those lipid nanoparticles that don't hit the two dendritic cells there, where do they all go? See, that's the question that video begs you to ask. Here's Sukrit. I don't think we need to hear this one. We can. This one's only a couple minutes.
Listen very carefully. This is a vessel wall. This is your blood. It is now known that the genes that are injected into your body will enter the bloodstream, and it is absolutely certain now that these genes are going to enter the cells that line the vessel wall, because these are the cells that they contact. Now, what happens when the cells that line the vessel walls begin to produce these spikes? The spikes will then be produced by the cell and protrude from the cell surface into the bloodstream. These cells are going to be recognized by your lymphocytes, given to you by the dear Lord, to kill those cells that are making the virus or the virus protein, any virus protein. So these lymphocytes are going to mount the attack on your vessel walls.
The important thing to remember here is that these cells, which have been expressing the spike protein driven by the lipid nanoparticle carried mRNA, are not going to be signaling with interferon gamma or anything to tell lymphocytes that I'm infected. They are just going to appear to be foreign cells. And that's what he's explaining here.
The first way towards clot formation that, as we know, is happening all over the place, all over the world. Now, at the beginning, after the first vaccination, this danger is bad and is already terrible in itself if your killer lymphocytes start trying to kill you. But at that time, during the first 7 to 10 days, there are still no antibodies. There are not yet any antibodies. However, after 3 or 4 weeks, there are masses of antibodies all over the place in your blood. And if you dare...
And so the antibodies are specific for the spike protein. So any spike protein that's expressed on the outside of these cells will then have the antibodies sticking to them, and those antibodies are flags. They are flags for macrophages to come and eat what they are stuck to. They are flags for neutrophils to come and destroy whatever they are stuck to, because they would stick to bacteria, for example. So as the B cell response arises to this original injection, the antibodies will start to bind to these spike proteins. And what he's saying then, if you inject mRNA again and you increase the amount of spike protein when there's already antibody, now the lymphocytes will see epithelial cells with spike protein and antibody on them, and so they'll say, wow, those have to be destroyed.
To repeat this performance and start to put those spikes out into your blood, God help you. Because now, not only the killer lymphocytes are going to attack, antibodies and complement and leukocytes are also going to attack, thinking that your cells that are producing these spikes are bacteria. And they are going to try to eat your vessel wall cells.
That's really what's happening, and I think he's nailed it. And then he's gone and worked with the pathologists in Germany to look at post-mortem vaccinated people and seen signs of lymphocyte infiltration and advanced inflammation in particular tissues like the myocardium, etc.
Listen.
So autoimmune hematologic disorders in 2 patients after vaccination. These are blood disorders happening in the skin, multi-inflammation and organ dysfunction after injection of the RNA, autoantibodies in children after the mRNA causing the multi-system inflammatory reaction. This is another kind of thrombocytopenia after Pfizer injection. This is acute myocarditis and acute heart attack after injection. We are not joking around anymore. Myocarditis and sudden death after injection in a 22-year-old man. Autoimmune hepatitis after vaccine. And this is all happening probably because the spike protein is so abundantly produced that it's circulating in exosomes. You want to believe this is a bonus, but it's not a bonus. This is a result of the toxicity and the destruction of the cells that are expressing so much of this protein. They knew it was happening because they warned you in the trials about not having sex with women of childbearing potential and not breathing on people and not breastfeeding, etc. And now there are several papers that are showing circulating exosomes strongly involved in SARS-CoV-2 infection. But of course, that was already known from viral infection because when cells die, they bleb. But when it's coming from also the vaccine, then we have a problem because it's just the apoptosis of these cells that are overexpressing the spike protein, and that's not good. So if they don't stop transfection, then what do? Well, it looks like what they do is they increase your ability to get infected, and they do that partially by weakening your immune response. Here is your N antibody response, and it is lower in individuals that acquire the infection following 2 doses of vaccination. This was also seen in an insider presentation, which I was given by one of my viewers. And again, this is recalling this 2019 paper where we looked at the antibodies were sufficient to kick off the macrophage response and set everything in balance, on an imbalance. So antibody-dependent enhancement has been known for a while here. We've been seeing lots of papers. Basically, the antibodies aren't all good. So vaccinating you to the spike protein to give you antibodies to it, and many of them not neutralizing, is not good because many non-neutralizing antibodies are not good. You can make antibodies to the interferon response. That can block the interferon response, which means you can't warn other cells, you can't call for help. They even sell ADE-causing antibodies on the internet already. So they know this happens. They know it's possible, and it comes from the vaccination to the spike. And that's what's happening. That's what will continue to happen as we go forward. And as they give more and more boosters, the antigenic sin will increase because they will cue off the immune system to try and over-enrich on this protein. So our biology unites us all. This is about angiotensin 2 and about how the spike protein can take it out of circulation, which will set this whole thing out of balance. It is a complex regulation of the levels of proteins of these proteins in circulation, which can cause the absorption and secretion of water. It can cause vasodilation, vasoconstriction, and it's an interplay between the liver and the kidney and the rest of the body. And so if you take ACE2 out of circulation, then you change the balance here between these two pathways. And you can see that here, where angiotensin 1 is converted by ACE2 to angiotensin 1,9, and then that goes to 1,7. But it's these two enzymes that are allowing the angiotensin to move between these four forms. And depending on which form it's in, it's either stimulating or not these opposing pathways. And so if you physically interact with ACE2, with this circulating spike protein getting stuck to it and then it getting cleared by macrophages, cleared by the liver, then the concentration of this protein goes down and the concentration of these proteins goes up, and then the body tries to compensate for it. And the best paper describing how this happens, and that's why I give it its own page here at the end of the show, is the Mechanistic Model and Therapeutic Interventions for COVID-19 involving a RAS-mediated bradykinin storm. This is the only paper that has described a plausible mechanism, molecular mechanism that covers almost everything you see in severe COVID, while giving a mechanistic explanation for it that covers everything from the crap in the lungs to the pulmonary edema to the leaking in the brain to the pain in the muscles to the heart and arrhythmia. Everything is explained by the dysregulation of ACE2. And we know that's happening. We know it's happening because that's the freaking target of that silly spike protein. And it can target like 3 or 4 of them with this triplet thing. And they're in circulation. So even if it's not bound, ACE2 in circulation can bind those viruses. And so it can be taken out of circulation and throw this out. If you can understand that, you understand so much more than the average person that's been coming along on this. So this is where we are. Much of the biology is known. Much of the basic immunology is known. And none of it is being given away for free on television. In fact, the opposite. And that's what we're fighting for. We're fighting for the truth for our kids. We're fighting for the truth for everyone. Peter McCullough was on Joe Rogan, and so was Robert Malone. We'll probably watch that tomorrow together. Admissions across the board. The transfections do not stop transmission. It's midnight. Holy cow, we're there. Tess Laurie, make sure you look that one up. Transfected humans are ever increasing portion of the hospitalization. The protein changing most rapidly is the one we thought it would. And again, the lipid nanoparticles are not doing what we thought they would. So the common narrative that's the biological bifurcation of America in a nutshell is very simple. We have a PBS ground truth, and then we have the biological ground truth, and our lack of biological understanding is making us accept this bullshit. And we are going to stop. We are going to learn this. If we haven't learned it already, we're going to teach it to everyone in the coming months. NK cells and T cells are the primary response to a respiratory virus. Antibodies are not the proven correlate of protection. Non-sterilizing immunizations are dangerous. We've looked at this paper many times. Its CDC says this shot doesn't stop transmission. Bill admits it too. This paper, Reed et al., shows that the shot doesn't stop transmission. You will have enrichment for viral virulence. Hert has been saying the same thing, and it seems to be happening because Trevor's data shows it. If you want to be very specific, teach them this paper. This is the little thing is out of place there, but that's because this is coming in. So Joe Rogan was said that it's completely wrong, and they tried to make fun of him because, these vaccines stop transmission. And then like really a week later, many papers came out showing equivalent viral loads between vaccinated and unvaccinated. And so definitively, this is not even a leaky vaccine. It doesn't stop transmission at all. No significant difference in viral load between vaccinated and unvaccinated people in symptomatic and asymptomatic groups. The correlation between the rollout of the vaccines and the appearance of these variants has been confirmed by Trevor Bedford. You can watch the whole video here on YouTube. It's extremely entertaining. This could only result from imperfect immune pressure on the virus. You see it in repeated changes occurring over and over in the world. The virus is also going to try and escape by interfering with interferon signaling, but that's fine. That's years from now. If we can stop the transfection, everything will be fine. Ladies and gentlemen, these 5 things are true, which means that in the year 2020, which is right now, Happy New Year, we are going to break this barrier. We're going to break this biology apart. We're going to smash it. We're going to bring everybody back to the good side. Stop all transfections in humans, please. The goal is the elimination of this control group, and you and I are members of it. If you haven't had your booster, you're actually still part of the club. Whoops. You're still part of this club. Even if you've had your booster, you can still be part of this club, because it doesn't have to be that you've been lucky enough to protect yourself to be in the control group. It can also just be that you are smart enough to know that you should have probably stayed in the control group, and that you wanted to be, and that you would rather just be a free individual. If you've come to the realization that you made the mistake, that's much better than continuing to make the mistake. Offer your family and friends compassion in 2020. Offer them GigaOM Biological, and we can do it together. This has been GigaOM Biological, a high-resistance, low-noise information stream brought to you by a biologist. We have a website. You can watch the stream on the website. You can support the stream on the website. You can download all of the slides that I used tonight there for free. Please do, because all the links are there. And you can also download this review from the website. Thank you very much. Wow, look, the date changed. It's January 1st. Check it out. Guys, these are the people that support the stream. All of these people are really awesome and fantastic. And if you want to join them, you can join them for as little as $5. Just buy me a coffee, send me some bike funds, do whatever you feel you can afford to do. It has been really a wonderful year getting to know all of you and seeing you guys. And hopefully we're going to have a wonderful 2022 that ends in a barbecue with all of us in the same place at the same time, having a wonderful time together. I love you all very much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. My name is Jonathan J. Couey. You can look me up on the internet. That's me. I would suggest that you go to COVIDfordoctorsethics.org. They have a symposium from December 10th, December 15th, December 21st. The December symposium, just start in the beginning and watch it. There are 2 talks. You can see Sukrit Bhakti, then you can see the pathologist from Germany, and then you can see Michael Yeadon all in the beginning of that. That's probably the best thing you can do tomorrow in the morning for your coffee if you want to follow up on this. Guys, I don't know how to say it. Thank you, thank you, thank you. It's been a blast, and I'll see you in 2022.